Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tinellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I make it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. Listeners, it's just wonderful to be back with you for yet another season of Talking Aussie Books, a wholly Australian podcast dedicated to the best of Aussie fiction. This is the first interview for season 6. Oh my gosh, where did all that time go? I can't tell you. But today, listeners, I'm introducing you to another author whose gorgeous debut novel called All the Golden Light has just been published by HarperCollins. This was a richly detailed, sweeping historical novel giving us a snapshot into the life of one woman living on the south coast of New South Wales at the tail end of World War I. A time of darkness, deprivation and trauma, not only for those who saw active service, but for those who were left behind. Now, author Siobhan O'Brien is no stranger to the publishing industry. Not only is Siobhan an author, but a journalist and communications person who has worked and written for a number of publications, including the Sydney Morning Herald, Vogue, InDesign and Monument. Siobhan's other notable work was published back in 2004, a biography of Australian designer and socialite Florence Broadhurst, published by Allen Unwin. But listeners, All the Golden Light is Siobhan's first work of fiction, and for me, as a part-time resident of the New South Wales South Coast, was an utter pleasure to read. So it gives me an enormous thrill to welcome Siobhan to the podcast today. Hi, Siobhan.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here.
And I'm very happy to be speaking with you. Now, we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, but I actually can't believe our paths haven't crossed before, given that you were living on the south coast of New South Wales for quite some time.
I know, extraordinary. And then, of course, we're bumping up against each other, and it's just now, it's kind of weird, isn't it?
You've been living on the south coast of New South Wales for some time, but you've only just recently relocated, haven't you?
Yeah, look, we've relocated to Bright in northeast Victoria, which is just absolutely stunning. We raised our 3 children in Borley Point on the south coast, so we were there for many years, but then of course we did live through the catastrophic fire event, so that changed everything for us. You know, I've only just arrived here as of a couple of days ago.
As I said in my introduction, you're no stranger to the publishing world, but I wanted to ask you, what does it feel like for you to be a published fiction author? What's going on for you right now?
Oh, wow, gosh, so many things. How do I start? It is so different for a writer to write a novel. It is so utterly, utterly different. For me, it was always the big, hairy, audacious dream to write the novel, which I suspect for many writers it would be. It's a very different beast. Having written a couple of biographies, you know, the story is all there. Journalistically, it's all there. So you apply yourself as a journalist does, and you write the story. The structure's there, the beginning, the end. We all kind of know how it's going to go, and you dig the research components and, you know, the historical sort of components. But, you know, the novel, my goodness me, I heard a podcast recently with Richard Flanagan, who I just adore, and I really do consider to be a living legend. He said that writing a novel is the hardest gig in town, and I wholeheartedly agree. So writing a novel, you know, you have to really understand, and this is the thing that I really did grapple with, you have to understand the structural and / architectural components of the thing, because it is a world within a world, and you have to make that world plausible. It must have emotional depth. It must be able to hook readers in so that you can actually steal 10 hours of their time, which is, you know, a big ask. You have to convince them that this is something that they need to plunge into. And, you know, as an avid reader myself, I am highly critical of myself and of things that I read. And I did want to raise the bar high. I did want to make this thing that it would be kind of like an experience for people, left feeling like, oh, that meant this to me, or this resonated with me, or I hated that character, or I loved that character, or even perhaps make you think things that you hadn't thought previously.
Well, it certainly did all of those things for me. But I mean, I guess having said that this is your first fiction novel, what was the journey like for you? Like, how long was this book in the making?
Oh gosh, long. I think around about 5 years, for goodness sakes. So what happened was that I did talk to my literary agent, Benithan Oldfield, who really is at the top of his game and just such a lovely, great friend as well. Spoke to him about this idea that I had a novel, idea. And his words to me were, you've got one chance. You've got to get it right. One chance. Because invariably they're going to say no, because every second person reckons that they've got a manuscript in them and the publishers are spoilt for choice. What am I going to do with that information? But I thought that, I had raised these kids. I had opened a retail store just simply by virtue that it was a financial necessity to, raise my children. And I thought, do you know what? I've done that. It is now my time. How am I going to do this to the best of my ability? So I actually went back to study. I did a 2-year novel and screenplay writing course. And, for a lot of that time, I was kicking and screaming, crying and doubting. For a creative person, it's very difficult to be held on a leash because you have this creativity that sort of wants to run away on itself. Stop that, just settle down and let's learn the thing here. And that is not a usual modus operandi for the creative. So a lot of tears. What's this character arc thing? What's this turning point thing? I don't care about those things, this sort of rubbish, like stop having an adult tanty and do it. So I bludgeoned on ahead. I was determined to do it. I did it in the most absurd of situations, like take my son to soccer. I'm the one sitting in the car writing the novel. Take my daughter to the dancing. I'm, sitting there, writing the novel. It was the only way. You just have to get really gritty about it.
We talked about you living on the South Coast, and I understand that the South Coast itself was a huge part of the inspiration behind all the Golden Light, wasn't it?
No doubt. No doubt. Because I was living, or we were living on a remote property in nature, I had this profound sort of relationship with nature and was very aware acutely on a daily basis how nature impacts our psyche. And not only that, the fact that nature is always there, yet the history around it changes. So I was aware that I was here on this land, but so many other, even though it was remote, so many others had been there before. And I thought, those women back in those times, in 1918 or whenever, and further back again, it was still the same land. It was still the same sun. It was the same. I mean, that's debatable given climate change.
Fantastic. So what was the seed of inspiration for this story? Why did you want to tell this story?
Because I had walked away from a career in publishing to be with my husband, basically left the publishing career that was really going really quite well to land myself in the middle of the bush. And then, of course, we had 3 beautiful children and everything. But I was thinking, this is actually really hard for me to do this because of the isolation, because of the lack of opportunity in the industry, so many things like that. And I thought, gee whiz, settle down. You've got a car. You can go into town and have a cappuccino. You can go to the library. It's actually okay. Then I thought, how would it have been for the pioneering women? And that was the seed. And in fact, when I was living down there, it was an incredible vista. We'd look out the sea. It was paradise. Look out, there's the sea, there's Durras Mountain over here. And I did read a story about a woman that had lived at the top of Durras Mountain. There are now ruins up there, like old chimneys and various other things. There was a woman that lived up there. I think she was married, but her husband did pass away. So she, went on ahead, growing her vegetables, had a little horse and cart and various other things. And down on the flat, there was another woman living, and they were friends. But, it was very difficult to sort of get to each other, but they would twinkle a little mirror at each other at the end of the day into the sun to say, you safe? Yes, I'm safe. So things like that. And then I'm thinking, what can I do with this?
Balaula, is that the way you imagined it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Balaula is the town that you set the book in. It's fictitious,
Mm.
but you've used actual places to create it. So can you tell us what places did you have in mind when imagining Balaula?
Where we lived, we did look out on an island called Balaula. An island of not great note. It's just like a little wee lump in the middle of the ocean with nothing on it, probably some rabbits or something. And then, because there were ships always going backwards and forwards, and I thought, what if they ran into this little island? Then I started to think about the islands. Then I started to think about Montague down near Narooma. And I've always had a fascination with lighthouses, as I suspect many of us have. There's something romantic about them. Romantic and spooky, I should say. I contacted a friend of mine, Preston Cope. He was working for National Parks down at Narooma. He was able to help me get an artist in residence at Montague. I stayed out there overnight. That was amazing. Not spooky. There's no ghosts out there. But down at Green Cape, there it is definitely haunted. It absolutely freaked me out. I went down there with the whole family. I said, "Oh, it's going to be wonderful. We'll go down to. It's going to be great. Great down to Green Cape. La la la." Oh my goodness me! Windows shuddering in the night. I'm, not a feeble kind of minded woman, but I'm clinging to my husband. He was just, passed out. I'm going, "Oh my God, get me out of here." And, you talk to some of the light keepers and they say, "Oh no, absolutely, it's haunted." And I became privy to the fact that in the late 1800s, there was a boat called the Lai Moon that came undone on the rocks there. And I think it was 73 people, don't hold me to that, people died, corpses floating in the water. The light keepers came down, took the bodies from the ocean, from the beach, and made a makeshift morgue in the dining room, which is adjacent to the room in which I slept.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was freaking out. I had to use the chamber pot. I didn't want to go outside.
I want to talk about lighthouses a little bit later. First, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about the story and about Adelaide Roberts and the journey that she's about to go on when we meet her.
So Adelaide is struggling with a psychological wound that pertains to the death of her mother and the fact that her brother has unwantingly gone to Pomel in France to fight in a war that he didn't want to be involved with, but suffered a shrapnel wound to the spine and is crippled as a consequence. She's struggling not only with that, but the fact that she's there with her father and the impact of the war and the drought that came just shortly before the war. It has impacted them to such a degree that it's become almost impossible for him to continue to keep her there as a young woman of a marriageable age. He wants to marry her off. She has other ideas, of course. She became very friendly at a young age with a character called Gwyn Sunderland, who's the daughter of Barnaby Sunderland, the local solicitor and mate of her father, Adelaide's father, that is. She gave Adelaide all these books of a feminist ilk. And when she started to read this writing, she thought, oh my gosh, there is another way for women to live. Through that journey, she was able to sort of shape thinking for herself rather than the thinking of her conservative parents. So she has other ideas and other desires. So that's how it kind of all started. But then, of course, fate intervenes.
Where did the inspiration for Adelaide come from? And were you intentional in your aim to write a story from the point of view of a single woman with dreams of living an independent life and the kinds of challenges she would have faced in this time of history? Or was this more of an organic thing for you?
No, it was definitely a thing that I felt concertedly from the get-go. So I'm the youngest of 5 children, and I have 4 older brothers, and our family is Irish Catholic, and it was rather a strict upbringing. And I must admit, and my brothers will probably laugh at this, but I've always felt like the real black sheep. Because I had to sort of speak much more loudly than perhaps I may have to be heard. My parents had quite conservative views of how a woman ought to be, and I had other ideas around that. So there was kind of that aspect for me personally and quite deeply. And also having left my life in publishing and having to really rethink how I was going to shape my life. I ended up in retail, for God's sake. I ended up loathing it with every fibre of my being, but it was a financial necessity. But I had to find a way, and it wasn't easy, to do that. I had to start again.
I guess what I'm hearing is that, like you, Adelaide had different ideas about the way she wanted to live her life, ideas that were different from the ideas that her father, and I would venture to say society, had in mind for her. I mean, Adelaide was a nurse and she had excellent skills and she had some ability to support herself. But having said that, she was still at the mercy of her father's authority and the prevailing social mores of the time. And Ned, as you said earlier, her father, he makes it abundantly clear that he can't afford to keep her or to support her as his daughter for much longer. So she was chafing against her father and society's expectations surrounding women. But also there was a fair bit of bad blood in the Roberts family, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Joseph, her brother who's crippled, she had a like-minded soul with him, but he's of course now in Birmingham, married to his nurse that he met when he was in the hospital in Calais. But, the bad blood absolutely is coming from this sense that Adelaide feels betrayed by her parents because they've sent their son to a war that she doesn't believe in. The consequences are absolutely catastrophic. Now we have a situation where Joseph won't come back to Australia or doesn't want to come back to Australia because he doesn't want to see his father.
Was that kind of attitude fairly common at the time?
Absolutely, it was. I mean, so many men would have gone to fight in that war, not wanting to do that, for sure.
Adelaide's family were very particular about their desire for their son Joseph to go, and they effectively, can you talk to us a little bit about that prevailing attitude?
They want the sons to be a hero. You've got to go and fight for the country, lad, fully knowing what they were sending their sons into. It was just, that's what people do. If you don't, you would have been considered a coward. They didn't want for that to reflect upon their family because it was a lot about how families were viewed from an external point of view rather than the reality of what was going on. Again, I can really relate to that because, my parents were born in the 30s, big families, they're one of 6, one of 7, but they're very much living with that avoidant kind of attitude. I feel directly linked to that through my grandfather who fought in World War II and would have lived through World War One, not having been there himself, but nonetheless seen the trauma of these men that had returned.
Now, we talked a little bit about your fascination with lighthouses, and this fascination has made its way into the narrative thread of this story. There is a lighthouse on the fictitious Marugan Island. So can you tell us why it was important to the story and in particular to Emmett, the lighthouse keeper?
Well, I really wanted to create 2 very, very different narratives around the 2 bachelors that come into Adelaide's life. So what I wanted to do was to have Emmett, who is quite a deeply thinking, sensitive man, who's had his own journey, having gone to the Somme and wounds of his own, the psychological wounds of his own. I felt that the lighthouse was a reflection of his pensive nature. There's nothing flashy about it. He's kind of surviving. He's isolated himself because there's a lot of emotions that he's having difficulty dealing with or expressing. He's a thinker. And I think that setting is so important, not only for the entire novel, but in each instance where you have a character. On the other hand, you have Donald, who's, flashy and living on a fifth generation sort of property with a fancy homestead, with a very different wartime story of his own.
I love the way that you pitted these two characters effectively against one another in more ways than one. And they both have come back from the war traumatized, but they each deal with their trauma in different ways, don't they?
Absolutely, yes, that was key. So one of the key things for me that I was trying to grapple with was this idea that there's a perception in the world that this person, if I were to be Adelaide Roberts, right? So the father says, oh, Donald is perfect for you. Not only is he Catholic, but he's got money. He's got a great future ahead of him. He's, oh my God, he's the answer to our prayers. Can't you see? That is all about how things appear. So, right, appearances. And then on the other hand, we have this fellow. Oh, he's Protestant. He's poor. He's a poet. He's nothing. He's never going to get anywhere. He doesn't own anything. But in fact, that's the romantic interest that she really loves. But no, because the appearances are wrong, no, he's not the one for you. So I loved the idea of playing with that appearances aren't what they seem. And I wanted to do it in a kind of a nuanced way rather than a superficial way, like just gently and yeah. So that's how I kind of played with that idea.
Despite all the trauma and the drama of this story, at the heart of the book lies a beautiful love story. A love that triumphs against all odds and demonstrates hope in the face of adversity. I wanted to ask you, Siobhan, how difficult was it for you to balance these different aspects of the story, giving due attention to the not inconsiderable difficulties of this era? And I want to say, especially for women, but I also want to acknowledge that these times were no walk in the park for the men who served in the war as well.
Gee whiz, there's so many different ways to look at that. I had to really ask myself about what Adelaide really wanted, despite everything else, like what her heart wanted. The heart wanting what the heart wants. And that is something that goes back to the beginning of time, just like the thing that I was talking to you about in relation to nature. So it's about her pursuing what her heart wants despite the difficulties. Again, I had to tread carefully. You don't want to bludgeon people over the head with things. I think that I tried to just weave it in, but it was like a consistent thing.
Siobhan, if there was one thing you would like readers to take away from this story, what would that be?
Just maybe that they, for a minute, they were suspended in this world within a world that I've endeavoured to create, actually.
Yeah.
That they can, in that 10 hours that it would take for them to read it, that they would get this sense of this world within a world. Because ultimately, that's what a novel should be, and often is not. And I'm always disappointed when it's not. I get cranky, actually. Yeah. I do. I'm like, wow, come on.
Talking about world building, sense of place in this story is very evocative. You are completely immersed into Adelaide's world in this story and the little bubble of the island of Murugan that Adelaide finds herself on and the lighthouse. So how did you immerse yourself into that world? How did you bring to life Adelaide's world onto the page?
Here I am living on this land day after day after day. It's all around me. I don't venture very far on weekends because it's too bothersome. When I want to go somewhere, I haven't got a shop to go to. I've only got a beach or a bush track, literally. So when it's just there as your everything, you see all the little details, the way the leaves change, the way the grasses change, the birds that come and go, the way the wind comes at certain times, and what it means when it's a southerly or a westerly or a this or a that. I was utterly immersed in that, as were my children. They grew up in that environment. That's how I did it. Wanting for readers to feel the minutiae of that I was so interconnected with on a daily basis. Living with blackouts constantly and generators and no electricity and no water when there was no electricity, and enduring extreme weather events, not just the fires, but winds tearing down trees, locking us in for 10 days. So, yeah, that's how.
Yeah. I was chatting with Michelle Evans from Harbour Bookshop in Ulladulla, a mutual friend of ours. Incidentally, I think I might have mentioned on this podcast before or on socials that this is my favourite bookshop ever.
Oh, yeah.
So a big shout out to Michelle and Georgia Evans and the incredible Harbour Bookshop team. Anyway, we were both saying that we always start a book by reading the acknowledgements first. I wonder if there's other people out there that do it, but it seems to be a quirky thing that passionate readers do. So anyway, I was reading the acknowledgements for your beautiful book and noticed a lovely tribute to Gary Evans, Michelle's late husband, and someone who was also a very dear friend to me. So I wondered, Siobhan, if you could elaborate on what Gaz's friendship meant to you.
Oh, wow, my heart. Yeah. Oh, gee whiz, what a great fellow. He was just so likeable and very, very loved. I doubt that I've ever seen a bigger funeral. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of people that could barely fit into the Civic Centre, which is in the middle of Ulladulla. He was that loved, but it was that he loved literature. He loved red wine and skiing too. We know that, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about how he loved literature so much. And when I would go into town, he would always say to me, "How's the book coming along? How's the book coming on?" Genuinely. So I felt like I had a kindred spirit there, you know. And he did champion the work of a lot of writers. He, of course, had a thing that is no longer Harbour Publishing. They did some interesting things. Then, of course, he did die suddenly, and it was just a tragedy. And he is missed in our community, dearly missed. Yeah, Gary, I couldn't not put that acknowledgement in.
It was lovely to see that in there.
Oh, now I'm going to cry. Seriously, stop it.
Okay, moving on. Siobhan, there are many writers who listen to this podcast, and given your experiences in publishing to date, I wondered if you had any tips for writers out there looking to get published.
Oh, gosh, bum glue? Bum glue is very important. Very important. And do you know something? I would say learn the skills, because it's a particular skill set. There is no doubt about it, and it will feel counterintuitive. And that's the thing that makes it so hard. It is counterintuitive, but learn the skills. Once you learn the skills, which don't stop, I might add. I'm not suggesting that I know all the skills at all by any stretch of the imagination. But if you learn the skills, you have got a chance. And then the skills continue and continue and continue. You know, even through the editing process, it was very, very interesting. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how steep my learning curve has been over the past years. What a great thing to be able to have a steep learning curve and to learn from people that are so good. You know, we were talking about Roberta Ivers at HarperCollins earlier. Oh my goodness me. I was in awe of her throughout the process. She's brilliant. Wow, what a gift to be given. Surround yourself with people that know what they're doing, that have who believe in your vision.
Not only are you a full-time writer, but when you're not writing, you're singing with your band, Minnie and the Moonrakers. Sounds like a life devoted to artistic pursuits if ever I had heard one. Now, I wanted to know, does your singing help with your writing and vice versa, or are they simply different forms of creative expression for you?
Yeah, simply different forms of creative energy. I just feel like I had my whole creative self on hold for so long, raising kids and everything, and now I'm like, oh, do you know what? I just need to do some stuff. Being creative breeds more creativity. It's just a life-affirming, fun thing to sing in front of those three brilliant musicians, and they are really brilliant, with serious runs on the board. And it's certainly a very, very different feeling entirely to be standing in that, and again, feeling held within that. They believe in what I'm doing and I believe in what they're doing, and it just creates this wonderful sense of trust. I go hard, you know, I'm not, you know, like some wallflower. I'm screaming like a banshee, and it's just so good.
So where do you play?
Everywhere.
Give us a plug for Minnie and the Moonrakers.
Yeah, don't be shy. Look, we play at festivals. We play in Canberra, we play in New South Wales, we play in Victoria. We've got something coming up in a couple of weeks at Yarrawonga, Albury, Wodonga. We play at breweries, wherever we can.
Okay, so Siobhan, what's next? Is there another book on your publishing horizon?
Yes, and I'm very, very excited about this one. It's based in 1869. I'm already halfway through it, and I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am about this. It's following the life of this man who's a bit of a con man. He's on the run. So he's in Liverpool in the UK. He's got himself a ticket for Sydney, Australia, but he doesn't know anything about this weird colony on the other side of the world. Nothing. It's just that he's literally at the end of the road because he's stolen something. And the people that are after him, they're involved with the Spanish militia. On it goes. He does come to Australia and he ends up in Majors Creek during the time of the gold rush. So again, I could not have done it without, knowing those skills. And I've been able to write it reasonably quickly, having gone through that process. Now I understand that for a novelist, what you need to try to channel is the story under the story. It's the unconscious stuff at a deeper level. So bring it right up and let it kind of tell itself. Because as a writer, you know certain things about a character that perhaps you might not talk about, but when you understand that, I can't even enunciate it properly, just trying to get to that deeper level.
Siobhan, if listeners wanted to learn more about you and your work or your books, as the case may be, where can they find you?
At the moment, Claudine, I am on Facebook and Instagram in both instances for the band and also for my work as a writer. But I am going to set up a website, and my intention is to set up an idea whereby I can do Zoom with book clubs. I would love to do that. And then we can all sit around and have a little glass of wine and we can talk about books. But that's a work in progress.
Siobhan, it's been absolutely wonderful to chat with you today about this stirring book. I wish you every success with it. And thank you very much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
That's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please drop me a line via my webpage at claudinetinellis.com, via Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. Alternatively, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Google Podcasts. Until next time, happy reading.